Lots of bikes are coming with this through the headset style routing, and it does look super clean. And set up right, it can be very, very quiet. With the right tools, which we'll go through now, it should be a really simple task. And okay, it is a bit more engaging than external routing, but it's not as bad as you might think. With lots of workshop tasks, we say put the bike in a stand and it makes it quite a bit easier. With this task, it's pretty much an essential. So yeah, a work stand, super duper useful. The other thing that's really useful is some of the internal cable routing kits. Park does one, but a couple of other brands do them too. And essentially they're a collection of different cables with threaded ends or plugs or rubber little grommets on the end, which help you pull and slide through the cable. And yeah, they do make the task a lot easier. There's other options too. You could get quite a simple and quite a cheap thing, is the RockShox Stealth Reverb routing kit. So it's a small little double barbed anodized aluminium insert that you can thread into a cable that's there and pull through another cable. It is really useful. I have heard and seen people using string and vacuum cleaners to pull cables through. But yeah, I've never tried it, and I think the internal routing kits are, well, the right tool for the job. Okay, with this video, we're going to focus on replacing a gear cable, rear gear cable, with the internal routing. But the rules apply to a rear brake. Of course, if you're really keen on us to do a video on how you can change your rear brake cable routing with internal cable routing through the headset style, let us know in the comments below and we can do a dedicated video for you. Okay, first task now is get the wheels out. We're taking off the brake levers and the shifter from the bar, so the bar and stem stay as one piece. It sounds a bit convoluted, but this way round, depending on what levers and brakes you've got and shifters, it does make it a lot easier. As we're going to take the fork out, if your fork is equipped with a remote lockout, this bit gets a little bit complicated. You'll need quite a few different straps just to make sure that you can suspend the fork and lockout so it's not damaged when it dangles. Sometimes it's long enough that it can dangle down, or other times you may have to put a small bench or a small stool to help support the fork so that that lockout lever doesn't get too tangled up. So what we're talking about straps, another good thing to do, and it's good workshop practice whenever you're taking a fork out or whenever you're doing anything with a headset, that's to run a strap around the down tube through the arch of the fork, just so that you can clamp it together. So when you undo the preload cap, just in case things have shifted around and that compression ring isn't compressing the headset as much as it could do, you don't want the fork to drop out. And with this strap, just as some insurance, it should mean you can save it. Okay, before we disassemble the headset, one last tip. A tray. Now it might sound a little bit odd to have a food tray. I'm not going to start serving burgers or fries. No, lots of these headsets that have through the routing cabling have lots of small parts, and often the headset space is opposed to being one piece, they're actually two piece. And once the preload is lifted, so once you start to undo the assembly, some of these parts can jiggle loose and, well, fall all over the place. Plus, when it comes to reassembly, you'll need to have all the parts together. So my top tip is using a tray like this just to put all of those headset spaces on, so when it comes time to reassemble, you haven't lost anything. Now I'm going to undo the preload cap, slide the bar and stem off. With the bar stem off, we're going to slide the fork out, we can get rid of our safety net. So now just carefully slide the fork out. This propane uses a 6-pack stem and spacer unit. So your bike might be different with the through headset cable ring. A lot of them are from Acros, so there'll be a lot of similarities once we get these spacers out of the way. Lots of the headsets are different, is the best description. So this 6-pack one has got a lower complete spacer and also cable guide. So we're just going to slide that out of the way, just like that. And then we get through to the actual headset spacers, which you can see are separated and two-piece. So we need to just wiggle these apart, just like so. So keep these spacers safe. This is one of the core pieces of the internal through the headset cable routing designs, and that's, well, this compression ring. It's really clever. It's got a little split ring, so it opens up and you can get some cables through. They are often quite delicate, so you need to be really careful that you don't damage it when we get the cables out, as we're going to do now. Now, note the orientation of where these grooves are in this preload cap, because it's really important when we're putting the cables back in. We're only going to replace one, but if you're going to replace more, you've got to make sure that this is orientated the right way. They often have interlocking little studs, which mean that you can't assemble it the wrong way around, but you might only realize that after you've put cables in the wrong place. So just be mindful, look now before we disassemble it anymore, of which orientation this preload collar is in. We're just focusing on the rear mech. Again, if you want us to do a rear brake one, say in the comments. Just be mindful, I've only got a few cables here, but if you've got a lot of cables, before you start removing shifters or lockout levers, if you've got a lot, it's a good idea to label them up. And I know that sounds a bit bonkers because you're like, well, I know what that cable is. But as soon as the shifter's off it, it can get very confusing very quickly with some of these internal routing systems. I'm just going to crack on now and get the cable, the inner, out of the shifter system. So all we've left with is the outer that's in the system. Okay, we've taken the cable out, we've taken the shifter off. Now we're going to get this inner cable in the right position. So it means we've got to thread it through some of this assembly. Okay, now you've got to do a little bit of brain gym, but a lot of these internal cable routing guides and kits have a similar setup where you'll have one that's got a threaded end. You might have magnets on there as well. The magnets and tools are really useful when you're trying to pull it through, but if we've already got a cable, what we can do is thread in, because we want that threaded barb to be at the other end, so when we pull the fresh cable in, it's going to be from that end. I know it sounds a bit complicated, but once you get your head around pushing through to thread back up, it all makes sense. So carefully take the threaded barb and thread it into the liner material in the outer cable. Thread it in there really tightly. You might need to use some little needle nose pliers or parallel push wrench just to make sure it's really tight in there, because when we're teasing that cable back through, it's kind of easy to get carried away and pull too hard and then it might go missing. Other thing to be noteful of is, on this bike especially, one of the reasons why it's so quiet, one of the real advantages of this routing technique, is that you can put foam easily around the cable. So inside we've got some foam wrapping around the outer cable, and that means that it makes it really quiet. But when we're routing through the frame again, we just have to be really mindful that we're sliding into that foam and we're not getting tangled up. Just be mindful, some systems use a combination of integrated and exposed cable routing. So sometimes there'll be zip ties as well. So before we go wild and start pulling cables through the frame, make sure that you've clipped or loosened off any other cable retention. Okay, we've made sure that the threaded cable kit is in correctly and it's in really nice and tight. We're going to check and monitor as we slide it through that we're not tangling with that inner foam, and we're going to use the main force to pull the cable through. So we're not going to push at this end, we're just going to pull smoothly through. So the fun start begins. With lots of these different threaded kits, you'll have a different attachment on the opposite end of the threaded barb. Now, whichever attachment's on there, something that you don't want to do is lose this end in the frame. I'm saying it because I've done it, and it makes a kind of relatively easy, smooth job into something a lot more engaging. So what I do is either tape this or literally wrap it round so that it can't go anywhere, because the last thing that you want is this section of cable to pull through the frame. So we're just going to do that, and this one's a magnet, so it'll hold in place. With the old section of cable out, don't throw it away, use it to measure your fresh cable to exactly the right length. That's assuming, of course, that it was the right length. So err on the side of it being a bit too long, so longer than the old one, because you can always trim it down afterwards, whereas you can't really add cable to cable. So thread the fresh cable, freshly cut, onto the threaded barb. With the fresh cable nicely threaded to the routing kit, we're just going to undo this so we can actually get a little bit of tension in the system to help bringing that cable through. Be mindful when using the routing kit not to pull too much on the inner thin cable, but more push with the outer cable because it's stiffer and stronger. Okay, what you might have noticed here is that we're sort of got a lot of exposure out of this end. So what we need to do is, again, a bit like when we've got the threaded tool, we don't want to put too much cable through. We don't want to get too much outer through either. So just have a visual check all the time that you're feeding it through that you're not going to slide too much cable into the frame. So we touched on it earlier about how this cable routing can be really quiet, and this blue hose is one of the reasons why. So this is a foam hose and it's actually meant to be on the inside of the frame. But don't worry, sometimes it can get caught on these routing kits, but it's really easy just to slide it on and slide it down into the tubes. With this propane, we've got this 6-pack cable guide. It's a really nice feature. It works with the lower stem race to help separate the cables. But it's another section that we've got to make sure that we thread the cable through the right section. So yeah, your headset may be different, might use a slightly different routing. Okay, we did say that this is a relatively easy, if engaging task. And while you've done the hardest part, this threading the cable section is quite tricky. But once you've mastered that, it's just a case of reassembling everything in the order that it came apart. It's an easy mistake to make because this compression ring fits in really well, but often you'll have additional pre-load and seals, just like this one has. So you've got to slot the seal in first, and then you can pop on the preload collar. So often these solid sections have little nodes that stick up and stick down, just so you can get the orientation correct. This is no different, but yours may be different. There we go, that just slots onto there. And then we've just got to feed this section here, which acts as a nice cable guide into the stem guide, just like that. Now for the headset spacers. Again, these often have the clip sections. Okay, I've got the fork in hand and we're going to carefully slide it up through. Just be really mindful that when you're looking down from the top here, that you're not cutting any of those cables. And this setup from Propane is really nice. We've got some of that blue protective foam protecting the cables from rubbing the steerer. Have the strap close to hand, just in case your stem and other assembly is far away and you need to hold the fork in place rather than just balance. We don't want it to slide out and fall on the floor. With the fork in hand, now we're going to slide the bar and stem back into place. Now we're going to continue the assembly process or reassembly process, and we're going to do shifters and dropper. We're going to put the front brake back on as well. And you might be wondering, but Owen, the toolkit's still on there, you haven't finished. Well, that's because we're going to do a really pro job. And once we've unthreaded this tool, we're going to retrim the cable. And we just want to make sure that it's really sharp and crisp so that that cable shifts really nicely. But before we cut that cable, we're just going to check the alignment and check that we've got enough coming out. So just slot it in without the cable and just look at the alignment. I think that's pretty good. I think I need to chop the end off just to clean it up a little bit. So just eyeball it, and maybe it needs to be a little bit shorter, but just check that it works. Remember that with this really nice internal cable routing, you don't have to worry about it kinking or twisting as you turn the bars because it's turning through the axis of the turning point. Another little workshop tip, most of you probably do it already, but take a little sharp pick like this, slide it in and just open up that inner liner. It means you can see that it's all clean, and it also helps the cable run really clean. Now we're going to add a little drip of lube into there as well to make sure that that cable runs super smooth. Okay, with the wheels in, it's time for just one last bolt check to check everything that you may have tightened up or stuff that you probably should have tightened up. With that done, it's time to head out to the trails. New gears ready. So enjoy. If you've enjoyed this, then please comment below. If you've got any tips or you want any more advice on, say, rear brake hosing through internal cable routing, then let us know. We're here to help you enjoy your ride.